The train platform where her husband sent her west alone. A Lakota chief met the train. The train was already pulling out when I got to the platform. Not that I was there to meet anyone. I was there because Harlow's mill had shorted me on the cedar posts again, and I needed to settle it with the station master, who also ran the freight ledger for Harlow's brother-in-law, which is how things worked in Caldwell in those years, everything tangled up in who was whose brother-in-law. I was not in a patient mood. I'd ridden 11 miles in an October cold that had come in fast off the plains, the kind that gets into the joint of your hip and reminds you how old you're getting. The platform was mostly empty by the time the last car cleared. A few men with hats low, a woman collecting a crate of chickens, a boy chasing a dog that had gotten loose from somewhere. The usual noise and smell of a depot, coal smoke, horse dung, the iron and grease smell of the rails themselves, and underneath it all, that particular cold that exists only on open platforms where the wind comes through without asking. She was sitting on a trunk. Not a small trunk. A real one, brass-cornered, the kind you cross an ocean with. She was sitting on top of it with her back very straight and her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at the track where the train had been. The way a person looks at something that has already happened to them and cannot be undone. I noticed her the way you notice something that doesn't fit. She was not dressed for a rail platform in western Kansas. She was dressed for a parlor in some city that had parlors. Her coat was good wool, city cut. Her hat had a pin in it with a small blue stone. The trunk beneath her had a tag tied to the handle with 2 addresses on it, one crossed out. The crossed-out address was the one she'd come from. I went and spoke with the station master, got the freight ledger situation as settled as it was going to get that day, which was not very settled. When I came back out, she was still there. It had been 40 minutes. The platform was empty now except for the boy who'd lost his dog. She had not moved. The wind was picking up. I am not a man who inserts himself into other people's business. I have lived long enough to know that a person sitting alone with their business already settled in their face does not generally want you coming over to add your opinion to it. But there was something about the way she sat, not collapsed, not crumpling, but holding herself in place by force of will alone, the way a man holds a wound closed with his hand until he can get somewhere to deal with it, that made me cross the platform. "You waiting for someone?" I said. She looked up. Her eyes were dark gray, not blue the way you'd expect with that coloring, gray like river ice before it breaks. "No," she said. "I was supposed to meet someone. He was not here." I looked at the trunk. I looked at the tag with the crossed-out address. I did not ask the obvious question. "Where are you going?" I said instead. She told me a name, a town 2 days' ride west, a settlement that was barely a settlement, just a cluster of homesteads out past the ridge that nobody had bothered to name properly yet. She said her husband had claimed land there 18 months ago and sent for her. "He sent for you," I said. "He sent a letter," she said, "saying to come." That was all she said. She didn't say he wasn't there to meet her. She didn't say what the crossed-out address meant, whether she had no home to go back to, whether someone had died, whether the house she'd come from was sold or burned or simply no longer hers. She didn't tell me any of that. She just looked at me with those gray eyes and said he'd sent a letter saying to come. I stood there a moment. The wind came through the platform and moved her hat, and she reached up and steadied it with one hand without looking at it. That one gesture, steady, practiced, no self-pity in it, that's what settled it. "I'm riding west," I said. "I can take you as far as the Hennessy Fork. From there it's half a day to where you're going." "I don't know you," she said. "No," I said. "My name is Elon Runsfar. I'm chief of the Kansas band that wintered at Crow Creek before the treaty pushed us north. Now I run cattle on the land that used to be ours, which is a kind of joke that took me 40 years to find funny. I'll hitch your trunk to my pack horse, and you can ride your own horse, if you have one, or the roan tied at the post at the end of the platform, if you don't." She studied me for a long moment. She was trying to read me. I let her. I have a face that has been in weather for 60-something years, and it does not give away a great deal, which is usually useful and occasionally, I'm told, alarming. She looked at the trunk. She looked at the roan. She looked at the track where the train had been. "I don't have a horse," she said. "Then we'll ride to the livery and buy you one," I said. "Unless you'd rather sleep on this platform, which I wouldn't recommend. The second shift of men coming in on the late freight are not generally the kind you'd want for company." She stood up. She was taller than I'd thought, sitting on the trunk. She held out her hand the way a man does, straight across, not the limp downward thing that some women do that says they expect you to squeeze it gently. "Margaret Pruitt," she said. I shook it. "Can you ride?" I said. "I can ride," she said, and there was something in her voice when she said it that told me she'd said that sentence before, in other situations about other things, and meant it each time. We bought her a small bay mare from Jess Aldous at the livery. Jess tried to sell her a sway-backed gray that was the sorriest animal I'd seen in several years, and I told him so. And then I told him what the mare was worth, which was less than he wanted but more than he'd get from anyone else in October, and just being Jess, he took it. The trunk went on the pack horse lashed flat. She did not say thank you for the horse negotiation. She said, "I'll pay you back what the difference was once I'm settled." "No need," I said. "I'd prefer to," she said. So that's how she was. We rode out of Caldwell into a cold that had real intentions. The sky was the color of pewter gone dull, and the grass was bent by wind, and the road west was 2 ruts of dried mud, with the frost just starting to harden them. I set a pace that was steady but not slow. The light would be gone early, and I wanted to reach the Sanderson Creek crossing before dark. She rode well, not showy, not careful the way city people ride when they're uncertain of themselves and trying not to show it. She rode like someone who'd been doing it since before they could choose. She kept up without comment, read the mare's tempo, let the animal find its footing on the frozen ruts without fighting it. After an hour she said, "You said the land used to be yours." "Yes," I said. She rode for a while. "I'm sorry for that," she said. "Are you the government?" I said. "No." "Then it's not yours to be sorry for," I said, "but I'll accept it in the spirit it was meant." She looked at me sideways, and for the first time there was something that was almost a smile at the edge of her mouth. Not quite, but almost. I had not made a woman almost smile in some years. I noticed it the way you notice a change in the wind. Her name was Margaret, but she didn't correct me when I didn't use it. I called her nothing for most of that first day, and she called me nothing back, and we got on fine. I'm a man who has spent a great deal of his life in the company of silence, and I know the difference between silence that is hostile and silence that is simply 2 people moving through the same country without needing to fill it with words. This was the second kind. She told me things in pieces, the way people tell you things when they're not deciding to tell you, just finding the words coming out of them because they've been holding them too long. Her husband, whose name was Carey Pruitt, had gone west in the spring of the year before last. He'd written 4 letters in the first 4 months. Then the letters had stopped. She'd waited. She'd written to the land office, to the postmaster at the settlement, to a man whose name Carey had mentioned once as a neighbor. No answers that told her anything except that yes, Carey Pruitt had filed a claim, and no one had seen him recently. She'd sold what she could sell in the house they'd rented in St. Louis. The house belonged to her brother-in-law, Carey's brother. And when the brother's wife made it clear that a woman with no husband and no income was a problem in their household, Margaret had bought a ticket. That was all she said about it. She said it the same way she'd told me he'd sent a letter saying to come, not looking for pity, just reporting what had happened the way you'd report weather. I thought about a man who sends for his wife and then is not there when she arrives. There are reasons that can happen to a man: illness, accident, trouble with the land or the neighbors or his own mind. But Carrie Pruitt had been gone long enough that none of those reasons sat well with me. A man who loves his wife gets word to her, one way or another. A man who doesn't, well. I did not say that. What I said was, when we get to the Hennessy Fork, I know a family, Akaffer. They've been at that settlement for years. They'll know what happened and they'll give you a meal and a bed while you sort things out. I don't need charity, she said. It's not charity, I said. Deo Akaffer is the person anyone west of Caldwell goes to when they need to know something. He knows every claim, every family, every piece of land and what's happened on it for 50 miles in any direction. He'll tell you what there is to know. The bed is because it'll be too dark to go further tonight. She looked straight ahead between the mare's ears. All right, she said. We stopped once in the late afternoon to water the horses at a creek that was still running under a skim of ice on the edges. I broke the ice with my boot heel and led both horses and the pack horse in while she held them. The water was so cold it had a sound like glass. She came and stood beside me while the horses drank. She had her hands in her pockets and her breath was coming white in the air, and she was watching the creek. "Do you live alone?" she said. Not the way a woman asks when she's interested in you. The way a person asks when they're thinking about their own situation and wondering about someone else's. "I have a ranch hand," I said. "Name of Pitts. He's 63 and ornery and the best man with horses I have ever known. Other than that, yes." "Wife," she said. "She died," I said, 4 winters ago, fever." She nodded. She didn't say she was sorry. I appreciated that. I'd had 11 years of people being sorry, and it had never made the fact of it different. "Children," she said. "One son," I said. "He's at the agency school at Pawnee. He'll be back in the spring." She looked at me. "Do you want him to be there, at the school?" That was not the question people usually asked. People usually said, "The schools are good for them," or "The schools will prepare them," or "Isn't that what's best?" No one asked if I wanted it. "No," I said, "but what I want and what will keep him alive in the world as it is becoming, those are different things. He knows that. He's wiser than I was at his age." She looked back at the creek. The horses were done drinking. Neither of us moved for a moment. "My father sent me to a school I didn't want to go to," she said. "I hated him for it at the time. Later I understood what he was doing." She paused. "Later still I understood that both things could be true." I looked at her. She was still watching the creek. The blue stone in her hat pin caught the last of the afternoon light. "Yes," I said, "both things can be true." We reached the Hennessy Fork with 20 minutes of light left. The Akaffer place was a 1/4 mile off the main track, a solid soddy with a proper shake shingle roof that Deo had added 2 years back, and a barn that was better built than most of the houses in Caldwell. Smoke was already coming up from the chimney. Deo Akaffer came out when he heard the horses. He was a broad man, black as good soil, with a beard going gray at the edges and the manner of a man who has never been surprised by anything and has made peace with that. He'd come from Georgia after the war, followed the buffalo hunters west, stopped following when he found land nobody'd bothered to claim because it looked hard. The land was hard. Deo made it yield anyway. "Elon," he said, and then looking at Margaret and the trunk on the pack horse, he said nothing else. He was too wise a man to ask before he'd been asked. "Mrs. Pruitt," I said, "Carrie Pruitt's wife. She came in on the afternoon train." Deo's face did something, a small thing, a tightening around the eyes, and I knew before he said a word what kind of news there was about Carrie Pruitt. "Come inside," Deo said. "Both of you. Adi's got venison and there's a fire." I will not tell what Deo told her, all of it, because it is not mine to tell. The short of it is that Carrie Pruitt had broken his back in a fall from a barn roof 7 months ago and had died 2 weeks after, and had been buried on his claim by the neighbor whose letter to Margaret had never arrived, having been given to the wrong postmaster in a town that barely deserved the name. The claim itself was still hers by law. The soddy Carrie had built was a soddy, one room, a fireplace that worked, a door that didn't, and it sat on 40 acres of flat Kansas that would grow wheat if you worked it hard enough. She sat and listened to all of this. Deo's wife Adiz brought her tea and sat next to her and held her hand, and Margaret let her. She did not cry in front of us. She looked at the fire. After a while she said, "Is the claim worth anything?" "The land is good," Deo said. "Hard but good wheat land." "Can I get there tomorrow?" she said. "I can take you," Deo said. "I'd like to see it," she said, "before I decide what to do." That was all. Adiz took her to the room they kept for guests, and I sat with Deo by the fire, and we drank his chicory coffee, which was terrible and warming in equal measure. "She going to be all right?" Deo said. "I think so," I said. "She's not soft." "Soft doesn't make it to Kansas," Deo said. "No," I said. He looked at me over his cup. Deo had known me a long time. He had a way of looking at you that was not unkind but was very thorough. I said, "Don't." "Didn't say a word," Deo said. "You were about to," I said. "I was about to say you look less like a man with a stone in his chest than you did last spring," he said. "That's all I was going to say." I drank my coffee. "The Cedar Post Harlow shorted me," I said. "Sure," Deo said. "The Cedar Posts." In the morning, I helped Deo load the trunk into his wagon, and they rode out toward the Prout claim. I should have ridden back to my own land. I had cattle to move before the hard freeze came, and Pitts couldn't manage the east pasture alone with his hip the way it was. I rode with them. The Prout claim was 40 acres of good flat land with a creek line on the east edge and a view of the ridge that would be handsome in the spring. The soddy was small but sound. Carrie Prout had known how to build, even if he hadn't known much else. The fireplace drew clean. The door didn't hang right, and I fixed it while Deo showed her the land. It took me 20 minutes. I found a leather hinge strap in the barn and 2 good screws, and the door swung true and latched the way it was supposed to. She came back from the walk with Deo, and I was on the step of the soddy. She looked at the door, she looked at me. "You fixed it," she said. "It wasn't hanging right," I said. She looked at it again. Then she went inside, and I heard her moving through the one room, her boots on the earthen floor. Deo stood with me. "She'll stay," Deo said quietly. "You can't know that," I said. "I've been watching people come out here for 12 years, Deo said. "I know who stays." Margaret came back out. She stood on the step of the soddy in the October cold with her good city coat and her hat with the blue stone pin, and she looked at the 40 acres of flat Kansas wheat land and the creek line and the ridge. "I'll need seed," she said, "for spring." "Aldous carries it," I said. "You'd want to order before January." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "The creek," she said, "does it run all year?" "Mostly," I said. "You'll have to break ice in January and February." She nodded again. She was doing the math that everyone who stays on this land has to do. Can I get through winter? Can I get to spring? Can I make what I have into something that will hold me another year and then another? It is a particular math, and most people cannot do it. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack a certain kind of will that is not about stubbornness, but about the capacity to see past the gap between now and then. She could do it. I could see that. I don't know how you see a thing like that in a person, but you do. "I'll come by," I said. "I'm at Crow Creek, 11 miles north. I pass the Hennessy Fork twice a week on ranch business. I can check the door holds and bring word of anything you need from Caldwell." She looked at me. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said, "but the door needs to be checked, and the storm coming in off the North Ridge in the next 10 days is going to be hard. You'll want someone who knows this land to ride through if it goes long." She was quiet, then she said, "I ride." "I know you ride," I said, "but you don't know this land yet." That settled it. Not because I'd argued her into it, because it was true and she was the kind of person who accepted true things. I came by that first Tuesday. The stovepipe had a gap in the joint where the cold was coming in, and I packed it with clay from the creek bank. I showed her how to bank the fire at night so she wouldn't wake to a cold box. She watched everything I did with her full attention, not in the way of someone who expects you to keep doing it for her, but in the way of someone learning it so they won't need you to. I came the following Friday. I brought her a half-side of beef smoked from my own stores, more than she could use before spring, I told her, and I needed the smokehouse space, which was not true. She looked at me. She took the beef. The Friday after that I came and she had made a pot of something. Venison she'd traded a D's 2 days mending for, root vegetables, a thing she called a Kansas stew that was nothing like any stew I'd tasted but was hot and good. She said I might as well eat before I rode back, since I'd come this far. I sat at the one table in the soddy and ate her stew, and she sat across from me and ate hers. We talked. I am not a man who talks easily, not from shyness but from habit. My life has not required a great deal of talking. But she asked things and I answered them, and then I asked things and she answered them, and we sat at that table for 2 hours that passed the way an hour passes when something is feeding you that you didn't know you were hungry for. She asked about my son. I told her about Thomas, his mind, which was sharp and critical and occasionally ruthless in the way of very young men who have seen too much too early. His talent with horses, which came from nowhere and from everywhere. The particular way he tilted his head when he was thinking through something difficult, which I recognized because I did it too, which both of us pretended not to notice. "You miss him," she said. "Yes," I said. "He'll come back in the spring," she said, not as comfort as fact. "Yes," I said. She looked at her bowl. "I used to watch the door," she said. "In St. Louis, every evening when I came home I used to think, maybe this will be the evening there's a letter. It got so I couldn't not think it. It was like a bad habit I couldn't break." "And now," I said. She looked up. "Now I look at the creek," she said. "In the morning, first thing, I look at the creek and I think that's still running, that's something." I looked at her, she was something. I did not say that, but I thought it clearly enough that she must have seen some version of it in my face, because she looked back down at her bowl, and there was color in her face that had not been there before. The storm came on a Thursday. I'd felt it building for 3 days, the particular pressure in the air that this part of Kansas builds before it really commits to winter, the sky going flat and white instead of gray, the cattle moving in tight without being pushed. It came in the night, and by morning I could not see my own barn. Pitts and I worked the cattle for 2 days. I am 61 years old and I worked those 2 days the way I worked in my 30s, not because I am in that kind of shape, but because the cattle needed it, and that is what you do. My hands were so cold by the second night that I couldn't feel the reins, and I had to look down to confirm I was still holding them. On the 3rd day the snow lightened. I told Pitts I was riding to the Prout claim. Pitts looked at me. "Storm's not done," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at me the way Deo had looked at me. That particular look that older men who know you well deploy when they want to say something, and have decided to say it sideways instead. "The cedar post Harlow shorted you," he said. "Stop," I said. "I'll have the east pasture done by noon," he said. I rode the 11 miles in the tail end of the storm. The snow was 8 inches on the flat and drifted in the draws. The roan knew the way, or knew enough of it, and I guided him through the draws by reading the land under the snow, which is something you learn in 40 years of riding this country. You stop seeing what's on the surface and start feeling what's underneath. The Prout soddy had a drift up to the window on the north side. The chimney was going. I could see the smoke. She heard the horse and came to the door before I knocked. She was dressed in layers, her city coat over what looked like 2 or 3 of everything else, and her hair was loose, which I had not seen before. She looked at me for a moment. "The door held," she said. "Good," I said. "Come in," she said. "You look like a fool who rode 11 miles in the tail end of a blizzard." "I've been called worse," I said. Inside was warm. She'd managed the stove well, banked it right, and kept the draft balanced. The beef was hanging from the roof beam, properly done. She had everything organized in the way of a person who has been paying close attention to the logic of a small space. There was a piece of fabric she was evidently hemming stretched on the table. A book lay face down on the window ledge. The whole room had the feeling of a life being made, carefully, out of the materials at hand. She sat me down and gave me coffee. Real coffee. I didn't ask where she'd gotten it, Deo probably, or Adiz, some trade. She sat across from me. We were quiet for a moment. "Were you worried?" I said. "About the storm," she said. "Yes." She thought about it. "The first night," she said. "The second night I was too tired to be worried. The third morning I looked at the creek and it was still running under the ice, and I thought, if that creek can hold on, then I can hold on." I looked at my coffee. Outside, the wind was still moving the snow off the ridge in long white scarves. "Margaret," I said. I had not used her name before. She looked at me. The gray eyes, river ice before it breaks, but warmer now, a different kind of gray. "I ride past the Hennessy Fork twice a week," I said. "I have reasons to, but I want to be plain with you about something." "All right," she said. "I'm not a young man," I said, "and I am not a simple one. I am 61 years old, and I am the son of a people who are being unmade by the world as it moves, and I have lived my whole life in the gap between what was and what is becoming, and I have managed that mostly by knowing what my responsibilities are and meeting them. My son needs me to hold the land until he comes back. My band needs me to hold the name and the history until there are people again to hold it after me. Those are not small things, and they are not going away." She was watching me. She had not moved. "But I am also a man," I said, "who rode 11 miles in a blizzard to see if a door held, and I would like, if you are willing, to keep riding past the Hennessy Fork, not for the cedar posts, not for Harlow's freight ledger, for you." The wind moved outside. The stove ticked. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was warm from holding the coffee cup, and mine was still cold from the ride, and she didn't pull away from the cold of it. She held it. "I looked at the creek this morning," she said, "and I thought, if he comes today, I'll know it means something. I've been thinking that for 3 Tuesdays and 3 Fridays." I looked at her hand on mine. "And the Thursdays," I said. "The Thursdays, I was hoping you'd come on a Thursday too," she said. Thomas came back in the spring. He was taller than I'd remembered, and his face had the particular set of a boy who has been somewhere difficult and has not been broken by it, which is both a relief and a grief to look at. He rode in on a Tuesday in April with his bag behind the saddle, and he saw the bay mare in my paddock next to the roan, and he stopped his horse. He looked at me. He had my eyes. "Whose mare?" he said. "Margaret Prout's," I said. "She rides over on Tuesdays." He looked at the mare. He looked at the soddy door. I'd brought it over in February and rehung it on better hardware, which was easier than riding 11 miles every few weeks to maintain it, and which had the additional merit of meaning she was here more often. He looked at the curtain in the window of the ranch house that was different from the curtain that had been there when he left. "Is she good?" he said. He was 16. He asked the thing that mattered. "She's very good," I said. He nodded. He got down from his horse. He went to the bay mare and stood with her a moment, letting her smell his hand, and she accepted him the way a calm animal accepts a calm person. "Can she ride?" he said. "She can ride," I said. "Good," he said. He took his horse to the barn. I stood in the yard in the April sun that was just starting to have heat in it again after the winter. The creek was running. The first of the grass was coming up on the south-facing slope. That thin, early green that is the best green there is because it means you got through. Margaret came out of the ranch house with 2 cups of coffee. She'd been here since Monday evening. She handed me one. We stood there in the yard, looking at nothing in particular, looking at the land, looking at what had made it through the winter and what was coming back. He asked if I could ride, she said. He did, I said. What did you tell him? The truth, I said. She looked at me sideways, and there it was, not almost a smile, the whole thing. The kind of smile that is also, if you know how to read it, a woman telling you something she is not going to say out loud because she does not need to, because you already know it, because the knowing of it is between you and has been for a while. I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me the way she leaned into things, not needing to, but choosing to. That was always the thing about Margaret. She did not do anything because she had no other choice. She did things because she'd looked at what was true and decided accordingly. The creek was running. Thomas was in the barn with his horse. The sky was wide and pale and very blue, and the ridge had lost its snow, and the land was coming back the way it always came back, if you stayed, if you held on, if you did the work of being here. She said nothing. I said nothing. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was, for a man who had spent a great many years knowing what he had to do and doing it and asking nothing back from the world, more than I had thought the world still had in it to give. But the world, it turns out, is not finished with you just because you have stopped asking. The creek was running, and she was there, and the spring was coming in, and that was the whole story of it. That was all of it. That was everything.